why Canaan is the main root of our Western civilization. The Canaanites were a high culture since the Bronze Age. Originally, their people inhabited the countries today of Lebanon, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and part of the peninsula of Sinai. Canaanites had 6 dialects: Ammonite, Moabite, Edomite, Phoenician, Punic, and Hebrew. Yes, Hebrew is not the language of the Hebrew people. It is a Canaanite dialect. Just for example, Swabian is a German dialect. Foreigners called the Canaanites often differently, even though they themselves, through the over 1,500 years of their existence, always referred to themselves as Kana'anim, children of Canaan, a legendary hero similar to the Roman Romulus. The Romans named them Carthaginians after their western capital Kartadasht, Carthage. By the way, Kartadasht merely means new town. Also Carthago Nova hence was also called Kartadasht, like the original Carthage. Foreigners named them sometimes Punic or Phoenician, just as Germany was often named after most neighbouring tribes known, like the Alemanni. But the Punic or the Phoenicians were no distinct people. They were just a region with a different dialect and slight variance how to draw the 22 Canaanite letters. These letters have the same name today as the Hebrew letters, mostly with the same translation, like Aleph, the letter A, meaning ox in Canaanite, and later in Hebrew too. Canaanite letters are the origin hence not only of Hebrew, but also of the alphabets of Greek and Latin. They invented the alphabet as we know, firstly moving away from writing in hieroglyphs, which greatly contributed to the intellectual rise in the Western civilization, since a hieroglyphic writing slows down intellectual progress severely. The Canaanites, being a nation focused mostly on peaceful trades, being situated in the center of more warlike Bronze Age cultures, inspired their neighbors greatly, but also absorbed a bit of them, though Canaan was more a cultural exporter. We see many of their gods with original Canaanite names in images, steles, and texts of the Egyptians and the Babylonians. The northern neighbors were the powerful kingdom of the Hittites. Unlike general assumption, it wasn't only Egypt which survived the fall of the Bronze Age cultures. The Canaanites weakened too. When centuries later the Hebrews, a nomadic plundering people, took South Canaan, naming it then Israel, the Hebrews forfeited their own original language and took both the Canaanite letters as well as the Canaanite language, making Hebrew the 6th Canaanite dialect. Yahweh, the prime deity of the then polytheist nomads called Hebrews, were, as said, nomadic plunderers, and Yahweh was the plunder god of these people. As source I referred to Dr. Justin Sledge, who is both a Jew and a professor at Wayne State University. You can follow his explanation of this on his YouTube channel Esoterica, a video with the title Who is Yahweh? Link in the description. Now when the Hebrews defeated much of the southern Canaanite tribes and took the land and settled there was little need for Yahweh as an aggressive plunder god anymore, so they integrated him into the Canaanite pantheon, which most Hebrews for a long time adapted, mostly in the region of the northern Israel, while in the south a minority of the so-called Yahwists pushed for a monotheism. The vast majority of Hebrews were Elohists, meaning polytheists. In Canaanite pantheon, El is the name of a chief god. El, a benevolent and righteous sky father god from whom Zeus and Jupiter were later derived as an export. Think of an old man with white hair and a beard sitting on a throne. The idea of the supreme god of Jews, Christians, Romans, and Greeks. The Torah. I learned early in the Order of the Golden Dawn, which I joined in 1988, the first three words of the Bible, or more precisely the Torah, the Christian Old Testament, are as follow: Bereshit bara Elohim. The constant common translation of Jews and Christian is, in the beginning God, and then created heaven and earth and so forth. Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning God. Now in polytheism, a main pantheon has most commonly a family name. The Norse and Germanic gods hence are called the Aesir, the Roman gods are the Dei Consentes, the Greek ones are the Olympians, one of the Celt gods are the Tuatha De Danann, children of the goddess Danu. And with El as the chief god of Canaan, they called their pantheon the Elohim. Im is always a plural in all Canaanite dialects, including Hebrew. So, in the Old Testament, it starts actually with the sentence, in the beginning the Canaanite gods, the Elohim, created heaven and earth. That is what actually is written there. I will not go too deep into Bible analysis. A few examples may suffice. Throughout the Old Testament, there is this hard to overlook dual nature of God. At one time cruel beyond imagination, only to be suddenly overcome by mercy, as if God is schizophrenic and has two personalities. This is because the God of the Bible is a merger of the two very different gods, the warlike Yahweh and the peaceful and righteous El. Take as an example the story of the destruction of Sodom. We never really hear an explanation as to why God wanted to kill everyone in that city for a sin. A long time it was presumed to be homosexuality, but even in the Torah, always only male homosexuality was forbidden. Like, you shall not lay with a man like with a woman. And now, leaving aside that this is technically impossible, maybe God wasn't too keen about biology, no word about women. So why kill all the people of a city, even in the unlikely thing would have been real that all male people of Sodom were actually gay? It would be a cruelty beyond imagination to kill all women and children too. Later there came other interpretations, but it still remains the fact that this is a highly moral questionable act, given at least minors could hardly be involved in any crime whatsoever. And then, all of a sudden, God has a change of mind. Abraham persuades him, and the God who just wanted to kill everybody in that city replies, "Oh well, if you find only 10 good people, I'll let live thousands of really evil criminals for the sake of these 10. But the story is suddenly interrupted here entirely. Like a lost passage, we skip just to the destruction. No mention if Abraham sought or found 10 good people. The plot is entirely dropped. Or to go to the beginning. Did you know God created man twice? Really, read it. The second story is the most famous. God created only man and in his image, and later created Eve from his rib, which biologically would make Eve a man too, but again, biology doesn't seem to be God's forte. Just as his omniscience. God places the tree of life in the garden, and when Adam and Eve hide in the bushes, the first thing Yahweh asks, "I can't see you, where are you?" Anyhow, the first story of the creation of man is lesser known. After the first, God must have forgotten he already had created humans, and so he makes them all over again in the second story. Anyway, the first story simply says, God made man in his image, and he made him as man and woman. Wait a second. In his image, and woman is also his image, is Yahweh a hermaphrodite? Or more likely, the original story had at least two deities, a father god and his wife, the mother goddess. Now, El has a wife called Asherah. And funny enough, a tablet was found not so long ago which actually depicts Yahweh as the ancient Hebrews imagined him. One thing you must know from the famous Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, they're a rather late addition and not, as the Torah claims, at the beginning of the Hebrew people. First, the Ten Commandments were modelled on the suzerainty treaties of the Hittites and other Mesopotamian empires, so it wasn't formally anything new, and then referred not to a god, but to the supreme status and law regulations given by the godlike Hittite king to their client states. It is dated, the Ten Commandments, generally to the 6th or 7th century BC, shortly before the Jews were abducted into the Babylonian exile. And, during that exile, something astounding happened. Being under the leash of a vastly superior culture, they reacted the same way all lesser developed cultures would do when under the control of a powerful and educated empire. They vilified their capturers as the embodiment of evil and changed their own religion and culture. It were these formative years in captivity when the pluralist Elohite Hebrews suddenly became monotheists, and the Yahwist purists won over many of the Hebrew in the exile to their side. If you read the Psalter with open eyes, it's like a long list of revenge prayers by a people with a huge inferiority complex who pray almost solely for the ruination of their enemies, and then in extension all who not like them. I know you may know these 2 or 3 peaceful and charming psalms, like 23, but if you read the entire Psalter, you see that it is revenge fantasy after revenge fantasy after revenge fantasy, and on a really, really big scale, like hunt them to the 6th and 7th generations thereafter. It became the root of the idea in religious history after the Babylonian exile. A people regarded only their God as true, and all others as false or evil demons to be destroyed. A heritage that would last millennia. It was a reaction to trauma, but after many centuries having mostly been Elohists and polytheists, the traces in the Torah and the Hebrew mysticism were impossible to entirely hide and remove. So Yahweh took the names of the Canaanite gods just as titles. The phase of change from Canaanite religion to the Hebrews into their stern monotheism was still a long struggle, and despite the Hebrews went to great lengths to destroy all evidence of that, some survived. Like this tablet which depicts Yahweh. Now we have many which are claimed to be pictures of his, but this one has written it upon it. That is a humanoid man with a really big penis and the head of a bull holding hands with his wife, and above it is written Yahweh and his Asherah. It is a transformation where Yahweh takes the status of El, whose wife was Asherah. This fascinating depiction also gives a completely new possible view on the story of the golden calf. When Moses, an Egyptian name by the way, like Thutmose and other pharaohs show, received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai and returns, he finds his people dancing around a golden calf. For a long time this was read as if the Hebrews had suddenly changed their religion. But why would they do this? In the light of the recently surfaced tablet showing Yahweh with the head of a bull or an ox, the much greater likeliness is they created the traditional image of Yahweh, a bull. Just a side note, going to the first commandment saying, "You shall not make an image of me." It never mentions why, or that he has no appearance. You cannot forbid making an appearance of a God who has none. So the commandments make only sense if Yahweh did have an appearance, but as in other cultures like the Hittites and their god kings, it was a sign of submission to the suzerainty of the Hittite god king, not to make images of said king by people who had been made his serfs. So Yahweh forbids to make an image of him because he has one, that of a bull or a humanoid bull. So when Moses found the Israelites adoring the bull, he wasn't angry because he had turned to another religion, but because they had depicted Yahweh in the traditional way. Language. One of the most revealing pathways to demonstrate that Judaism and in the result Christianity are an offspring of the Canaanite religion, a mystery cult, is language. Most Christians and Jews pray to the good, kind and righteous God. This God has nothing of the original vengeful, malicious conqueror and plunder God of the Hebrew tribes, Yahweh. The God today prayed by these two religions, Judaism and Christianity, much more resembles down to the idea of the kind man sitting on a throne to El. El is that just and fair sky father God. Yahweh historically never was. The idea that a monotheist God needs dozens of titles is fishy enough in itself, but it comes outright hilarious when basically every title he has or sacred phrase is the name of a Canaanite god. It begins with names which are all too familiar with: Michael, Daniel, Raphael, Gabriel. All these are Hebrew, the sixth Canaanite dialect, and are supposed to refer to God in the ending letters El. But again, El is the chief god of the Canaanite, it's not a title. So, Michael today is translated in Hebrew, who is like God. Daniel, my judge is God, and so forth, when in actuality these names were long known before the Hebrews settled in South Canaan. These were known Canaanite names. Same names, same meaning, only referring to the God who in both the ancient and modern version are clear to see. El, leader of the pantheon called the Elohim, who according to the first words of the Bible created heaven and earth. The same goes even for the name Israel itself. Israel is not the same of a people or a region. It is the name of a person. So says the Bible. And trust me, it's a real killer story. Israel is a name given to a person born under the name Jacob, which, by the way, according to Genesis 28:12-17, means betrayer. Now Jacob fled his homeland and during a night fought with someone who later was to be revealed an angel of Yahweh. Henceforth, as a result of that fight, Jacob was always in the remainder of his life limping. What a god that is. Anyway, it must be noted that in all the Levantine cultures, including Judaism, being physically impaired is regarded as a very bad omen. Hence, for example, in Hebrew, it is strictly forbidden that anyone physically impaired, he was not allowed to participate in the rituals. This is especially important for the Kohanim, the priests. Quote, "Any man among your offspring throughout the generations who has a defect shall not come near to offer up his God's food." Leviticus 21:17. Meaning that if you are lame or need glasses, God just doesn't allow you to be a rabbi. This stigma against impaired people in the entire Near East is millennia old, and even today counts as a sign of a bad omen. And yet, this man, crippled by the angel of Yahweh, is now called Israel, he who fought God. But El, again. What God again? Israelites often call their own land Eretz Israel, which in modern Hebrew translated as earth or land of Israel. So like Canaanites named themselves after the mystic hero, the Romans did too, so did the Israelites. The fun reality, however, is Eretz was the Canaanite goddess of the living earth, not a dead thing, not a name for a country or a region. It was the living earth goddess. So in a sense, this is also the beginning of materialism. The living goddess of the earth, Eretz, is the deity of Canaan, similar to Gaia, and suddenly is just dead matter. Rock, earth, a dead land which you can just claim. With El being the Canaanite chief god, Eretz Israel practically translates land of the Canaanite earth goddess of the crippled Jacob who fought against the Canaanite chief god El. And also the claim the Hebrews were in Egypt captivity and just returned home to their old ancestral land, there is not an inch of proof for that. The Egyptians used paid workers for their pyramids, as we know now. The Israelites are mentioned very few times in Egyptian tables, as if being of no relevance to them by any means, and that they were returned to where they came from is a theory historians have long clearly debunked. The proof they have and often cite is, oh yes, there were the words of Hebrew in this region. Well, Hebrew is not the original language of the Hebrews, as we have already cleared up. It's the language of the Canaanites. The Hebrews took this language. The original language that these tribes called Hebrews originally spoken is forgotten. Nobody knows. Or take the city of Jerusalem. Jews praise the city in formulas, very devoted and often. The name plays a pivotal role. The original name of Jerusalem was Urushalim, meaning foundation of Shalim, referring to a sacred place of Shalim. A Shalim, however, is the child of the Canaanite god El and Asherah, basically like Jupiter and Hera in the Greek version, and Shalim is the evening star, a deity of the evening star, together with his brother Charan, the morning star. Now, since the morning star is the planet Venus, and the morning star and the evening star are the same, something the educated Canaanites were quite aware of, this deity had been given a Latin name later in Rome, quite well known, Lucifer. So, in a way, Jerusalem translates as holy place of Lucifer. This isn't to troll Jews and Christians and Satanists. As myself, I am a Roman polytheist. Lucifer is merely a minor deity belonging to the court of Venus, a herald of dusk and dawn. Often the morning star and Venus Aphrodite are also identified, in which case Jerusalem could also be translated as holy place of Venus. Which leads us directly to another funny reality. You know that Yahweh has a lot of choirs of angels. They are usually called choirs because they made a lot of singing and noises. More the latter, if you follow the Old Testament really thoroughly. Now the throne of Yahweh is capable to move, as we know from the Torah. It is carried by a group of 4 angels called the cherubim, which are usually described as a sort of wheels. Now around the platform, carrying the throne of God, there are 4 guardian angels called the seraphim. They stand around it and for eternity sing Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. In modern, this means holy, holy, holy. Something you maybe know from some Christmas songs. A term often referred to in Judaism and Christianity. However, it is not only a Canaanite word, long predating the writing of the Hebrew Torah, but it means holy in Canaanite and refers to Kadeshtu, the Canaanite goddess of love, or in Western terms, Venus Aphrodite. So you may see it actually like a sort of trolling when, in other words, the four angels surrounding the throne of God, the seraphim, constantly singing the name of a naked woman, the love goddess Kadeshtu. But Yahweh has all sorts of angelic groups, one called the Malachim, fiery messengers. Now, it's too bad that Malach has its roots in the all-too-well-known Canaanite god of fire, Moloch. Not in Canaanite, of which Hebrew is a dialect, mostly vowels are not written, so we have only MLK. Malach and Moloch are hence the same word. It is noteworthy that an astoundingly large number of attributes, servants, apparitions of Yahweh are fiery. Columns of fire lead the Hebrews through the desert. On Mount Sinai, God has a fiery appearance. Fire is a common punishment on evil cities, and all angel choirs are more or less described as being surrounded by flame and fire. Even Saul met Yahweh in a burning bush. And even Mount Sinai, the place where Moses met Yahweh, is described basically as a volcano. Quote, "And he came near and stood under the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire into the midst of heaven, with darkness, clouds, and thick darkness. And the Lord spake unto you out of the midst of the fire." Deuteronomy 4:11. While currently there is a mountain in Israel, in the Sinai region, called Mount Sinai, there are no clear descriptions of it, so historically it may be any mountain, or some fiction entirely. Given the Hebrews are said to have stayed 40 years in the desert led by God, an awful long time if you ask me, it may be more a mystical aspect than an actual mountain. We know this is the more toned down version of the latter humanized concepts of angels as halos and radiant light. Apparently creepy looking flaming angel and a burning god was no longer a popular idea. Same with the toned down God, who is no longer surrounded by fire and brimstone, and of what biblical being does that actually remind you, but he is now surrounded with gentle light. One famous titles of Yahweh is El Shaddai. Again, we have El. Shaddai goes back to the Canaanite word for place in the wilderness. In Akkadian language, Shadu refers to a holy mountain, and the people of the Levant, as much in later Greece, assumed their gods to dwell far away on mountain tops. Again, long before the Torah was ever written. So Yahweh having El Shaddai as title simply refers to God El on the holy mountain in the wilderness, as in far away from civilized regular people. A fun fact is, by the way, in Hebrew, Shaddai is retranslated as destroyer, referring much to the original character of Yahweh as a destructive plunder god of a nomadic people. The Jews themselves refer to Yahweh in religious ceremony, because the name is not allowed to be said, as Adonai. Now, Adon is the Canaanite word meaning Lord, adding I, it makes my Lord in Canaanite. Another interesting thing is the Hebrews always claimed to have been set up of 12 tribes. It's a very important foundation story for the people of Israel. One of them was the tribe Judah, from which the term Jews came. Now, one may wonder what happened to the other 11 tribes, but anyway, one very specifically mentioned is the tribe of Cohen, in plural Kohanim. In the Bible, they are the only chosen tribe of Yahweh, the only ones allowed to carry the Ark of the Covenant, and who are chosen as the tribe to be priests. Only them, the Cohens. The funny reality, however, is Cohen, long before the Hebrews arrived, was not a name but a title of a profession in ancient Canaan. It simply meant priest. It wasn't a tribe or a family name, it was a job. It is a strange coincidence that an entire Hebrew tribe would take the name of their most hated rivals as the word meaning priest. Once the Yahwists finally won and the Elohists were defeated among the Israelites, the former gods of Canaan, from whom the Hebrews took the land and quite brutally genocided many of them, they turned the names of many of the Canaanite gods into demons and devils in mockery names. So Astarte, the goddess of war and love, similar to the Babylonian Ishtar, became the demon Astaroth. The god of war, Bel, in later Canaan, also in local variants known as Baal, meaning simply Lord, was Baal, the demon in local variants, was predominantly Beelzebub, a mockery in Hebrew meaning Lord of Flies of the Canaanite local god Baal-zebul, which just translated as exalted god, and was the city patron of the city of Ekron. Ekron is culturally now regarded a city of the Philistines, which is the ancient name of the Palestinian people, whose origin is largely unknown, but since they lived in the Canaanite lands, we can assume they were at least related to them. Due to latest research, the Philistines, now called Palestines, were not actually an ethnicity, but a mixture of ethnic people predominantly being Canaanites in either culture or heritage. The Kabbalah. We know the people of the Bronze Age cultures had highly developed mysteries, among them numerology and cosmic models. These were with high probability where the Greeks got their main cosmology from. Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon are copies of the Levant triads of gods. I studied the Kabbalah for over 30 years. Now the most focal point in the Kabbalah is the Tree of Life, a graphic model of the cosmos. In Judaism it is said that the 10 spheres or Sephirot are emanations of God. Why a so strictly monotheist religion would need God split into 10 emanations is fishy already, but it gets weirder from here. The highest divine, the first sphere Kether. Each sphere has a name or title of Yahweh, but Yahweh's name itself only appears at the fourth sphere from the top, below the sacred triad. If Yahweh is the chief and only God, why does his name only appear in the fourth sphere, even below a presumed abyss that divides the highest triad from the lower world? No. The Kabbalah makes no sense in a very strict monotheism. Where it does make sense is in a polytheist mystery school, which it was. We know the Greeks learned much of their numerology and mystery concepts from the Levant region, like astrology or the idea of sacred triads. The importance of the variations of 3, 6, and 12 from the Levant is still present in our culture. We have 12 months, a day have 2 times 12 hours, 60 minutes, 60 seconds. Our entire thinking in triads, down to the modern philosophy of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. It is a concept of thinking entirely alien to other cultural spaces, maybe with the exception of Taoism, but that never was meant in any practical way, but merely as a mystical inner cultivation for the individual spiritual seekers. It never became a part of thinking in Asia. No. It is, however, typical for the Near East thinking before monotheism, namely the Babylonians and the Canaanites, from the Hebrews incorporated it, and passed it on to the classic Greek and later to Christianity. Which in turn means, in a nutshell, all roots of our spiritual and mundane concepts are rooted in Canaan, and to some lesser degree in Babylon. That Babylon, where the Jews were captive, and surely they adapted the advanced and refined concepts of the Babylonians as well as the Canaanites in whose land they lived. given that the Torah or Old Testament was written quite late, and before we have largely oral tradition with a few minor texts. All this grandiose super way backdating is a quite transparent way of a formerly nomadic plunderer tribe to justify their claim of South Canaan. The Kabbalah is most likely the only remainder of what was the Canaanite spiritual cosmology, and in variant became the root of ancient Greek cosmology, likely down to Pythagorean and Neoplatonism, and through that the formation of Christianity. They have their Trinity too, just as the hallmark of Babylon and Canaan. The champion of Christianity, Emperor Constantine, was a known follower throughout his life of a god called Sol Invictus. Christians claimed he converted to Christianity on his deathbed. Believe of that what you want, but Sol Invictus was an important cult. And the original name of the Romanized name Sol Invictus was Malak Bel, the Canaanite god of the sun, a god of justice, of the divine light, protection from evil, and in a sense a salvation deity as sun gods generally are. They save the lost souls from the dark. Malak Bel Sol Invictus was usually depicted with a solar halo behind his head, like the angels, saints, and the resurrected Jesus later in Christianity. Malak Bel means messenger of Bel. Bel, still having El in his name, in the area around Palmyra, was the highest god, translating as the god. So, Malak Bel Sol Invictus, the deity Constantine followed throughout his life, son of the Godfather, became the template for the Godfather and his radiant son bringing the light to the world. Sounds familiar? This rabbit hole would go much deeper, and it is the door just merely opened. Much of it is known by scholars for some time, but no one dares or wants to overthrow the entire Jewish history, for reasons I can entirely sympathize with, given the history of the 20th century, and it's not that I wrote this in dislike of present-day Jews. I write this as a historian revealing facts. I have no personal beef in it. It would be absurd also to blame people today for things done over 2,000 years ago. But when people say Western culture stands on the true roots of classic antiquity of Greece and Judeo-Christianity, remember that these in turn rest largely, if not entirely, on the Kana'anim, the children of Canaan, and they deserve to be recognized and respected as such.